Woo! So you're wondering why I'm all excited and everything? Like, because by the time this video goes up, it'll be my birthday! Yippee! So that means I'm going to be taking the week off to celebrate my 19th birthday. It's going to be a lot of fun. But in the meantime, enjoy some of my personal favorite videos of mine. Thank you and enjoy the show. Okay, let's do things a little differently this week for Porter vs. Workbench. This is the graveyard of the Porter vs. Workbench. Some of these models may have appeared on my channel a long time ago. Others, I believe, only were revealed to Twitter. And for those wondering, no, I don't think I'll ever be revisiting these guys, sadly. As I would like to make some of the main characters like James and Duck, for example, in the future. Maybe even some more dummy units, you know? But I figured it'd be kind of cool to just let these guys just rot away in the box under my desk for eternity. So here we are. Let's get into the relics of the past in the graveyard. Here we have the remains of an engine that was once known as Hamilton. This was made using a Bachmann 060 that was painted into the Big City Railroad star colors. In the front of the engine was achieved using an index card, which I thought looked cool at the time, then I realized that it actually breaks US railroad regulations that requires a Buckeye coupler at the front of every engine. It still runs actually, but very slowly. But yeah, I don't think I'll ever be revisiting this character, as I just eventually got bored of it and retired it. And so that's where he stands. Hamilton. Here is one that was actually really close to completion. Crazy Bartholomew. This was made using a 3D print file designed by Scarlet Boy on Twitter, and it was painted yellow. Made this about like 2, 3, 4 months ago, I guess. And let me tell you, the printing stage for this shell was absolute hell. It failed, I saw it like 7 times, and I had to add like 8,000 supports to this thing. Despite all the supports being added onto it in the print process, it still ended up a little bit warped. And the removal of supports ended up causing some of the window frames to break off. But the running board, man, ugh, that was what killed it. It broke repeatedly during the painting process, and it was also pretty warped as well. And the back buffer beam was basically destroyed beyond proportion, so I tried fixing it with some index card, but it ultimately looked like shit, so yeah. And that is the death of the Crazy Bartholomew model. This model actually is a very similar story to the last one. This was my work in progress of a 2015 Thomas. This is meant to be a realistic take on that special Thomas Wooden Railway 2-pack that came out with that 1942 Thomas for the 70th anniversary. I even bought a special blue spray paint to match this model. But, like Bartholomew, there were durability issues with supports, some more than others, and the buffer beam for this print was also shot. It wasn't as bad as the last model, but it was still very noticeable. And the lighting is pretty good, I'd say, but the numbering. Oh, that number 1 is atrocious. Both of them are. See, I tried using paint pens for this to be more precise with it, but despite letting the paint dry for an absurd amount of time, the paints ended up reactivating and mixing with each other to make a weird orange color. So yeah. Here is the remains of locomotive number 3. I believe this guy was only ever seen in my 2022 big train collection video. He basically vanished into the void after that video, as I never really found a purpose for the model. It was more or less a painting exercise, if anything. And the more I just looked at it, the more I started to dislike it. And thus it was banished to the box under the desk. Oh, this is pretty funny actually. These are my remains of my Harvey model. So yeah, Percy basically was cannibalized to become Harvey, and all of them ended up being scrapped altogether. Kinda sad though. Yeah, well, I mean, I could do better with the skills I developed now if I were to remake Harvey in the future. But yeah, this was made using an old Harvey pocket rocket. Here is the single remaining piece of my original Percy model. This is the boiler or saddle tank of the Hornby pocket rocket. The original model was actually a repaint with no mods at all to the bodywork. But yeah, there's actually one mod that I actually want to redo. Maybe with a 3D printed shell, probably a Pug or Pekka chassis in the future. Here is the remains of Puffa, my original Puffa model from 2022. I tried redoing this guy alongside a little owl, but the more I looked at it, the more I realized that it could have been a better take on the model, probably a little bit closer to the original source material. But yeah, that's my original Puffa model. And here's the final scrapped model of the graveyard, Duchess. Her story involves me trying to make a Henry Mark I out of the chassis. See, I tried taking apart the chassis completely to paint the frames and the wheels red, and thus the model now no longer works without the railing. And that, my friends, is the Porterverse Workbench Graveyard. I must admit, it was pretty fun diving into these old models again. It's been a while since I've actually seen some of them. Thank you all very much for watching this episode of Porterverse Workbench, and I will see you all in the next one. We are back with more Porterverse lore ramblings. Oh yeah, this is episode 7. Here we go. Number 1. Stephen is actually not the original rocket locomotive that currently resides at York. The Stephen that we are familiar with is actually the engine that was from the 1920s Buster Keaton film Our Hospitality. After the film's release, it is unknown where this replica of Will went. But regardless, it managed to surface for long enough in the early 70s for Robert Norby to come along and purchase it for the Ulfstead Castle Railway. And Stephen was fully restored to work in order just in time for the railway's opening in 1974, where he still works today. Pretty cool. Number 2. Thomas, the tank engine, and Box Hill are actually really good friends. But how, you may ask, when Thomas never worked on the LBSER in the Porterverse? Allow me to explain. So, in 1912, the Knapford and Ulster Rail was greatly expanding and became the Knapford, Arlesborough, and Ulfstead Railway. And so, the KNUR and the LBSER struck up a deal that saw an engine and a handful of rolling stock be brought over on a multi-year loan deal for construction. And Box Hill was the engine in question, and Box Hill remained on Sodor before returning to the mainland in around 1923 before grouping. And it was around this time they got to know Thomas and became good friends. And fast forward to around 1960, and a rail tour set to travel through Sodor, and it was confirmed that a Terrier class will be pulling this rail tour. And you can imagine Thomas getting excited, as he might see his good old friend Box Hill again after nearly 40 years. You can imagine his utter disappointment when Stebney, a completely different Terrier, showed up instead. And thus the events of Thomas and Stebney unfold for the most part as it does in the TV series. But Thomas would see Box Hill again at the big railway gala in York in 1991, after nearly 70 years. They did a lot of catching up after that, to say the least. Number 3. The Flying Scotsman will visit Sodor frequently while in preservation. And these visits really kicked up in frequency in the 2010s, and he most often visits the Ulfstead Castle Railway whenever he's on Sodor. But he always makes sure to catch up with his brother Gordon wherever he visits. And for those wondering, he remains in his Eleni or Apple Green livery with 2 tenders. Because BR Green son! Number 4. Mr. Jelly's chocolate factory resides on the Peel Gotcha branch line, north of Kronk to be exact, and it lies at the bottom of a hill. And it first opened with the branch line in 1925. Percy will end up crashing into it in 1953 with his infamous chocolate crunch accident, and that will cause the factory to close for a good few years. But it would reopen in 1969, with an even bigger factory than before, which still sees regular rail traffic to this very day. Number 5. Rebecca was built in 1947 and was placed on the northwestern region of British Railways, where she often hauled commuter services. But in 1965, she collided with another commuter train caused by a points failure. And a few people sadly perished in this accident, including Rebecca's crew and Rebecca herself, sadly. A memorial plaque was placed at the collision site and is dedicated to her and those who perished that night. Number 6. Bo, yes, that Bo that Bachman is making out of nowhere, actually worked on the Big City Railroad for a decent bit, hence why he has buffers. And he's drawn around 1900 or so, and he actually managed to survive long enough to become a static display at the Ulfstead Castle Railway. That's right. Our good old friend Sir Robert Normandy managed to scoop up Bo for his Castle Railway, and Bo still resides at the castle to this very day. Number 7. Our Percy that we know and love came about in 1926. It was in this year that several of the mainland engines went on strike, as they demanded a new shunter be placed at Navarre Station for their coaches. Tom had the first, acts accordingly, and he managed to get a copy of an old saddle tank engine from the Robert Heath Sons and Company, specifically the number 6 engine. He modified the blueprints designed to have a bunker on the back for longer journeys, and after a few months of built construction, Percy emerged from the works and became the Nafford pilot. In 1955, Duck took over this process, and Percy was promoted to the Ulfstead branch line with Thomas and Toby, where he still works today. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Welcome all to the Portable Workbench once again, and for the first time in the new year of 2023. Woo! For today's episode, we're focusing on a remnant of Dale Thomas events, a dummy unit. Why is the example the way it is? Well, as we're going to the backstory of this dude in the Porterverse. Here we go. Around the 1990s or so, Dale Thomas events began to pop up across the world more and more frequently, and many railways began either converting existing engines to look like Thomas, or just buying/building dummy units, some looking out better than others. This example here shown in my model is one that was built rather cheaply, as it only had 4 wheels and was a lot smaller. Not much is really known about this exact engine other than it was on a United States railroad for some time until around 2003 when it was left abandoned. Meanwhile, the real Thomas began hauling rail tours across the United States starting in 1999, visiting the Strasburg Railroad among other railways. In around 2005, on his other tours, Thomas would bump into one of these dummy units and become rather surprised with them, as prior to that point he had no idea they existed. He was still kind of like cool with it, as you know, marketability and everything. And he got used to it over time, especially after running into more along the way. Not much is known about the fate of this dude or his whereabouts currently in 2023. So that's kind of where the story ends. The trail goes cold. While the trail goes cold on a backstory, the model story is a whole other level. So this was made from an all-engine scope push-along Thomas that was modified to fit on an 040 chassis I had. The chassis being heavily cut down, of course. So I took the Thomas toy apart, and I stripped the paint by submerging the body in acetone overnight. I would recommend only doing this with metal materials, as acetone can sometimes melt plastic. I've seen it melt Legos before, it's kind of creepy looking. So yeah, after submerging overnight in acetone, I took out the metal body, and I scraped it with a metal wire brush to get all the paint off. Once that was done, I washed it off with some soap and water just to make sure it was extra clean. And then I primed the boy with some primer. White primer to be exact. Any brand works really. Then after letting that dry overnight, I began doing a hydro dip on this. It's very simple, you just take a bucket of water and spray it on top of the surface. As the whatever pattern floats on the surface, you can slowly dip anything into it and it'll replicate the pattern onto the whatever you're hydro dipping, you know? That's what I did with the body. This was my first time doing a hydro dip on anything, so it looks kind of rough here. But I figured since it is meant to be an abandoned engine, it kind of works. Think of it as graffiti. So yeah, after hydro dipping the body, I let it dry overnight again. And while that was drying, I began doing all chassis work. I had to cut it down and remove the motor. Motor was gigantic, I had to tell you. And then I had to remove all the gears inside and all that stuff to make sure the engine free-rolled smoothly, as there's no motor in this engine, sadly. And then I took a blue paint pen to the wheels to make them blue to match. Well, sort of match, but you know. And then I repainted the toy smoke box black, as the toy I got was originally like a sparkly blue. And then I also repainted the whistles gold, as they were just yellow, and I wanted a more realistic whistle. And then took a black paint pen and painted the top of the running board black to match the railway series a bit. And then I took a hot glue gun, and then I mounted the chassis, but then afterwards, I took the tip of the hot glue gun using the heat, and I melted down the face's nose. And then made a huge melt mark you can see on the left side of him. So I can make it look like it was abandoned and worn down over time, you know? And then after a coat of matte clear, he was done. Well, I also forgot to mention, I drew on some number 1s with gold paint pen. Just to make sure you know who it is. That was my abandoned Dale Thomas dummy unit. But we are not done here. we still have some more bench updates. So, if you remember seeing a community post a while back, you'll see that I made SpongeBob's house in HO00 scale. Well, that's not the last of it. I've also made Squidward's house from the same guy who made the print, so I'll put a link in the description so I can find the print. And for those wondering, yes, I do plan to make Patrick's house, just need to finish him up. He is almost done, I promise. So yeah, that's kind of the whole Porterverse workbench as it is currently. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. At long last, we return to Railways of the Porterverse. This episode will focus on the one and only Coldy Fell Mountain Railway. Disclaimer as always, this series only covers lore from my personal headcanon, which I like to call the Porterverse, and does not cover any official Railway series lore or anything from the canon. So if anything you see is different from the Railway series or any of the canon, it's intentional, and it has no bearing on the actual Railway series lore. So if you agree with the lore video, it's perfectly fine. If you disagree, totally fine as well. It's all a bit of fun anyway. Now then, since we got that out of the way, let's finally dive into the history of the Coldy Fell Mountain Railway. The story begins a lot different from its Railway series counterpart. The Coldy Fell Mountain Railway was the tourist attraction proposed initially in 1928. It was held off until 1930 due to the Depression, and when Soto's economy was beginning to recover, more developments began to take place as well. And the Coldy Fell will be a mountain incline railway that will run from Kirkmanshan, which will connect with the Northwestern Railway's Kildare branch line, and run all the way up to the summit of Soldier's largest mountain, Coldy Fell. Construction will begin in early 1930, and the line will officially open for service in August of 1931. A handful of engines were built by the Snowdon Mountain Railway in Wales based on their existing engine designs. 4 engines were initially ordered. These were Godred, Ernest, Wilfred, and Coldy, respectively. All were named after various figures in Southern history, and they were all painted into a purple livery with orange lining. Things would sadly go wrong after the first few months opening. This is when Godred, the railway's number 1, tumbled down the mountain and almost killed him. He was severely damaged and was sent to the builders in Switzerland for a complete overhaul, and he will return in 1939 after an extensive overhaul that finally put him back into operating use. In 1940, just a year into World War II, the railway's engines were painted to wartime black like all the other engines across the UK. This livery would last until 1946. The Coldy Fell Mountain Railway will also be one of the few railways that were not absorbed into British Railways and remained in its independent company. In 1950, a severe rockslide occurred that damaged the line. The railway was forced to close for about 2 months where repairs took place. 1954 saw Coldy leave for an overhaul. The overhaul was conducted in Wales and took some time, so Coldy is absent from the railway for about the next 9 years or so. During Coldy's overhaul, the railway undertook a massive expansion project that saw the line become a 2-track line, as well as a fence border being placed along the entirety of the line. This would be completed by around 1956. The railway's 5th engine, number 5, Shane, would also arrive to fill in and later stay upon Coldy's return. Fast forward a bit to 1962, when 3 new engines arrived. These were numbers 6 through 8, and they were known as Patrick, Alaric, and Erica respectively. Each of them were built with a new superheat design. In 1963, Coldy finally returned from overhaul. It was now one of the stronger engines on the railway. In 1990, Wilfred was sent off for an extensive rebuild, and he returned as the largest engine of the railway's fleet. He was now a 062 tank engine painted to a bright yellow livery. Number 7, Alaric, would also join in this new yellow livery as well the next year. This is basically where the timeline of major events ends for the railway. Just know that it's still operating and thriving in present day. So yeah, that is the Coldy Fell Mountain Railway as it is in the Porterverse. The next video will unfortunately be a marathon video, as I have some IRL affairs that I have to attend to for pretty much the whole week. Do apologize in advance for that. But the week after that, I'll be back to regular uploading, with possibly another either a lore ramblings episode, or maybe in return to Porterverse Workbench with a similar face. Thank you all for understanding, and thank you all very much for watching this episode of Portable's Workbench, and I shall see you all in the next one. Finally returned to regular programming once again. Thank you for all the support on the marathon videos, really appreciate it. I really wanted to put out videos during those 3 weeks, but a kid named High School Final Exams kind of got away with that. So I need to put something out while I was testing those during that time. And so I figured those marathons would be a good segue into what I like to call phase 2 of my content, if you will. A lot of new stuff's on the way, new series, some slight updates to other series as well. And we're going to be starting out phase 2, sort of, with the Portable's Workbench installments, focusing on the one and only Molly. And so here we go. After years of anticipation, dreaming, and waiting, Molly the Yellow Engine has finally arrived in my collection. You're probably wondering why. Why make Molly, who was in one episode as a lead, and appeared in a few episodes as a background character, and basically never seen again after a season or two? Well, to put it simply, she was a favorite of mine during my childhood. For some reason, I remember loving this character as a kid. I even owned the Trackmaster Molly when I was little, played with that thing all the time. Yellow was also my favorite color at the time. I was like 5 or 6 at the time. And thus I naturally just gravitated towards Molly. And I also remember that Whistle Memory game on the old Thomas website, and Molly was amongst the big 3 at Thomas, Percy, and James. She was even also in a bunch of the Bath Toys packs that were grouped in with the mains as well. Molly was there too, and a bunch of others. It's kind of leads to believe that Molly was pretty hyped to be a potential new lead character for Thomas. Not only did she stand out visually, there was also a lot of potential there for a character. And also gender balance, that was starting to become a thing, but yeah, anyway. So yeah, I don't know why they never made her a lead. A lot of potential. And so that's why I incorporated Molly into the Portaverse, which is my personal headcanon. Speaking of which, let's get into Molly's backstory in the Portaverse. Molly was built in 1913 at Stratford Works like the rest of her class, and she was an extra member of the class built. And she was built as a special order placed by the newly formed Nafford, Aldersborough, and Ulster Railway the year before. After construction was completed, Molly was shipped over to Sodor, and she became the first ever express engine on the KNUR and the first express engine on the east coast of Sodor. Molly was also painted into a very unique livery as well, this being a bright yellow with white wheels at that time. Very, very flashy indeed. And she was eventually given black wheels when she was sent over for an overhaul in 1933. This was when she was rebuilt into a D16. And over time, Molly gradually became a secondary express engine whenever Gordon was out of action. She also did a lot of freight service at her time as well. And Molly was the very first engine to request a repaint, as she pretty much hated her British Railways livery. And thus Molly was repainted back into her iconic yellow livery, as that is depicted on the model. In present day, Molly is preserved as the last D16 around, handling a mixture of passenger and freight services for the Northwestern Railway. Molly was one of the very first engines on my build list when I first started modeling back in 2021. I knew pretty much right away that a D16 would be the base model for this. After winning the bid, I waited a couple weeks for the model to arrive, and the day finally came. Now it's time to paint her up into her iconic yellow livery. But yeah, usually the gray primer would take about 2 coats being brushed on, so after all that drying, I went nuts with the yellow paint. The color is quite simply apple barrel yellow. Straight up yellow. After the yellow was fully applied and dried, I did a lot of touch-up work in black acrylic. After all that was the lining. I used a red paint pan and very carefully went on the indented lining on the boiler, cab, and tender. After all that lining, I made out the front of the swim box door in silver Sharpie, and also blacked out the number board as it had a British Railways number on it. A white paint pen was used for these weird top things in a tender, and it was left on Molly's TV series model, so I just carried it over. After all the painting was done, I gave the model a matte clear coat. And the final step was to paint the side rods red, with the red paint pen. And then of course give her my signature staple sort of elements, the tuck style megaphone. And just like that, Molly was done. This will be the part of the video where I showed the model running around and stuff. But you know what sucks? Apparently, so the model worked before I painted it. But when I tested it afterwards, when I was done, it didn't work. After investigating, I found that one of the wires in the pickups had come loose. You can probably hear the immense pain in my voice just saying that. Yeah, this was not fun to find out. But yeah, rest assured that one day I will get Molly running again. What that involves, I don't know. New chassis, bunch of wire surgery, who knows? I will, one more words, I will one day get this model Molly running again. Molly is one of my favorite engines in the Thomas universe. Not only for nostalgia reasons, but also her hidden potential within. I will be holding on this model for the rest of my days. And like many others in this collection, she's easily one of my favorites. Top 3, dare I say? Yeah, definitely top 3. Thank you all very much for watching this episode of Porterverse Workbench. And I will see you all in the next one.
And now, folks, it's time to say goodnight. We sincerely appreciate your patronage and hope we've succeeded in bringing you an enjoyable evening of entertainment. Please drive home carefully and come back again soon. Good night.